In the stillness of night, when shadows grow long and the familiar becomes foreign, the most ordinary places can transform into arenas of terror. This compilation of short stories invites readers into the eerie and unpredictable world of a simple gas station, a place where the mundane meets the macabre. The Night Shifter. On a crisp, autumn night, Jim was working the graveyard shift at a remote gas station off the old highway. Business was slow, the kind of slow that made the hours crawl by like the crickets chirping in the field. He had just finished restocking the shelves with the usual travel essentials when the time came for his routine chore of taking out the trash. The back of the gas station faced a dense woodland, separated by a flimsy wire fence. As he heaved the bags into the bins, a rustle from the dark thicket of bushes grabbed his attention. It sounded like something large shifting in the shadows. Jim's heart raced, but then he laughed at himself. "Probably just a raccoon," he muttered, trying to shake the tension away. Later, during his break, Jim stood outside, leaning against the wall as he lit a cigarette. The night was silent except for the distant sound of an owl. He drew in a long drag, and as he exhaled, he noticed an odd, musky scent. It was like wet fur mingled with the earthy dampness of fallen leaves. He looked around, the neon sign above him flickering slightly, casting an eerie glow. He peered into the darkness, but saw nothing. Returning to the counter, Jim passed the time by flipping through a car magazine. The roads were empty, and the night was unusually still. Then, something caught his eye, a quick movement across the street, barely visible under the streetlights. It was large and swift, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. A wave of unease washed over him. He locked the front door, just in case. Hours ticked by, and with each passing one, Jim felt more on edge. He thought of the strange occurrences, trying to rationalize them. "It's just one of those nights," he told himself. But then, as he was counting the cash, his eyes were drawn to the window. Two red eyes glowed in the darkness, fixated on him. They didn't move, they didn't blink. Jim's blood ran cold, and he ducked below the counter, heart pounding in his chest. When he finally mustered the courage to look again, the eyes were gone. He breathed a sigh of relief but remained vigilant. The rest of his shift passed without incident, and he convinced himself it had all been in his head, a trick of the light or perhaps fatigue. The clock struck 2, signaling the end of Jim's shift. He switched off the lights, locked the cash register, and armed the station's alarm. As he walked to his car, the earlier fear had dissipated, replaced by the anticipation of his warm bed waiting at home. That's when the attack came, sudden and ferocious. Pain lanced through his neck as sharp teeth pierced his flesh. He screamed, a gurgling sound drowned out by a guttural growl. The creature, massive, with matted fur and eyes reflecting the moonlight in a demonic red, had him pinned to the ground. Jim fought with everything he had, but his strength was no match for the beast. As his struggle weakened, Jim's senses heightened. He could taste the metallic tang of his own blood filling his mouth, could feel the hot breath of the creature on his face. In a fleeting moment of clarity, he realized the werewolf was real, and it had been stalking him all night. With one final, forceful bite, the world faded to black, and Jim knew no more. The creature vanished into the night, leaving behind only the echo of its howl and the tragedy of what had just transpired. Last stand at the pump. In the dead of night, with the crescent moon hanging low in the sky, Rick barricaded himself inside a derelict gas station. Outside, the world had succumbed to chaos as a zombie outbreak ravaged the city. Rick, a lone survivor in this new world order, was making a last stand. Earlier that day, he had heard the emergency broadcasts, a relentless stream of static interspersed with warnings and screams, before the signals died out. Armed with a makeshift arsenal of a shotgun, a crowbar, and his wits, Rick had scavenged enough supplies to possibly get him through the night. The first wave hit as he was organizing his rations. Groans of the undead filtered through the boarded-up windows, a cacophony of hunger for the living. They came shuffling, a mass of decaying bodies, their lifeless eyes reflecting a world turned hellish. Rick steadied his shotgun, the pump-action click resonating like a war drum. He fired through a gap in the wooden planks, the recoil jarring his shoulder as rotting heads exploded in a spray of gore. He moved swiftly, a silent prayer on his lips as he whirled between the aisles, crowbar in hand for the closer encounters. Each swing was a dance with death, each hit a symphony of survival. The gas station became a battleground, with Rick leveraging shelves and counters to funnel the creatures into his deadly path. When the back door gave way under the weight of the pressing horde, Rick ignited a trail of gasoline he had poured in anticipation. Flames roared to life, creating a fiery barrier that consumed zombies in a hellish blaze. But the fire was a temporary reprieve. It also meant his shelter was now a ticking time bomb of spreading inferno and imminent explosion. Rick fought through the smoke, his lungs burning with the effort. He climbed atop the roof through an old maintenance hatch as the fire spread, casting an orange glow against the darkness. Below, the zombies clawed and staggered, their moans rising with the crackle of flames. The roof would not hold for long, and Rick knew it. The time had come for escape or to be consumed by fire and flesh-eaters. With a running leap, he sprinted and jumped onto the adjacent building, rolling to break his fall. The gas station erupted behind him, a beacon of destruction in the night. He didn't look back. There was no time. The city awaited him, a gauntlet of the undead between him and the faint hope of a safe haven. Rick charged into the night, a lone warrior in a world gone mad, his determination unyielded, his survival uncertain, but his fight far from over. The consuming night. In the heart of a storm-lashed night, a small group of late customers and a weary clerk named Eddie found themselves staring down the barrel of a robber's gun at a lonely gas station off Route 29. The thief, masked and erratic, herded them into a cramped backroom, four frightened souls praying for life. The robber's eyes were wild with desperation, his voice a serrated whisper as he demanded they stay quiet and await his partners. Time stretched thin as they sat huddled on oil-stained floors, the gas station's neon sign buzzing like a trapped fly outside. Then, amid the stifled whimpers and roaring thunder, one hostage volunteered to use the restroom, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks. He never returned. Panic set in as minutes ticked by, and another hostage, a young woman in a red coat, offered to check on him, thinking safety in numbers. She, too, disappeared into the shadow-laden aisles of the store. Silence enveloped the gas station, save for the storm's rage and the remaining hostages' muffled cries. The thief grew more agitated with each vanishing hostage, suspecting a ploy or police involvement. He sent another, only for them to vanish as well. Soon, only Eddie and the robber remained, the storm outside mirroring the chaos within. The robber, now paranoid, accused Eddie of trickery. But the clerk just shrugged, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. The hours waned, the storm's fury unabated, and the robber's confidence began to wane. As dawn approached, the robber's resolve crumbled, and he bolted for the door, only to collapse, a look of profound betrayal etched onto his dying face as Eddie stood over him, a bloody makeshift shiv in hand. When the police finally arrived, they found Eddie behind the counter, methodically wiping his hands clean. The backroom bore no sign of struggle, no evidence of the hostages. It was as if the night had swallowed them whole. Eddie greeted the officers with a benign nod, his lips glistening with a crimson hue as he licked them clean. In the dim morning light, his smile was wide and serene, an unsettling calm in his eyes as he relished the secret of the night's true horror. Midnight Mechanic. In the sepia-toned haze of a flickering street lamp, the gas station stood as a solitary beacon on the edge of town. The Midnight Mechanic, as Old Frank was known, never had a customer after 11. The townsfolk said he could fix anything, from a child's broken toy to the mayor's luxury car. But the car that rolled into Frank's station that night was from another era entirely, a pristine 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air that gleamed under the moon's pale gaze. It was midnight when the Chevy first arrived, purring like a sleeping beast. The driver, a shadow within a shadow, would simply nod to Frank, hand over the keys, and walk off down the road, disappearing into the night. Frank didn't mind. The car was a beauty and deserved care, even if its owner was an enigma. Night after night, the Chevy appeared, and night after night, Frank toiled away, lost in his work, replacing parts that seemed to deteriorate by the day. It was a mechanic's dream, a project that never ended, and Frank grew obsessed with the car's perfection. But one evening, as Frank lay beneath the chassis, tightening a bolt that seemed to loosen itself by will, he found a registration slip. Thomas Sullivan, it read, and a chill ran through him. He knew that name. It belonged to a young man who had driven off the bridge outside of town, back in '57, the very year the car was made. Curiosity piqued, and with a foreboding feeling gripping his gut, Frank decided to investigate. He visited the town library and rifled through old newspapers until he found what he was looking for, a black and white photo of the very same Chevy, now rusted and waterlogged in the aftermath of Thomas's fatal accident. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The car he had been working on was the same car from the newspaper clipping, but every night it arrived in mint condition, without a single sign of rust or ruin. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, Frank waited in the station for the car to return. Midnight struck, and the purr of an engine crept into the silence. The Chevy rolled in, glinting with spectral beauty. Frank approached the driver's side with a trembling hand and found the seat empty, the air cold. He decided to follow the shadowy figure that night, watching as it made its way to the bridge and vanished before his eyes. The next night, Frank didn't wait for the owner to leave. Instead, he slid into the driver's seat and drove towards the bridge himself, feeling the car come alive beneath him. As he approached the bridge, Frank saw the ghostly figure of Thomas Sullivan in the rearview mirror, reaching out to him, eyes hollow with the same desperation that must have seized him in his final moments. Frank stopped the car at the center of the bridge and waited. The ghost of Thomas appeared beside him, translucent and flickering. Frank, with a voice as steady as he could muster, offered a deal to the spirit. He would fix the car every night, ensuring its eternal beauty, if Thomas would find peace and move on. The ghost nodded, and a serene light filled the car. When dawn broke, Frank was alone, the Chevy beside him now showing its true age, rusted and silent. Thomas Sullivan was never seen again, and the car stopped coming to Frank's gas station. But the midnight mechanic had one last job, to push the Chevy into the river, letting the water cleanse away the sorrow tied to its frame, setting both the car and its owner free. Fumes. The old gas station on the outskirts of town had a forlorn air, its rusted pumps and faded sign a testament to better days. Mark, the attendant, was a man of routine, comfortable in the solitude of his job. That is, until the day the fuel tanks started leaking an unknown substance into the ground, a chemical that the company assured would be cleaned up without issue. The night after the spill, Mark noticed the fumes thickening, a viscous, almost sentient mist weaving between the aisles and pumps. It wasn't long before he began to see things, grotesque, shifting shapes that darted just beyond his vision. They whispered, a muffled cacophony that grew clearer with each passing hour. With a trembling hand, he reached for the phone to call for help, but the line crackled with the same eerie whispers, and then, silence. The gas station was cut off, an island in a sea of swirling mist. Mark was alone, or so he thought. As he patrolled the perimeter, the ground beneath him felt spongy, alive, as if breathing. The candy wrappers and oil cans littered around seemed to move of their own accord, skittering away from his approaching steps. And then the hallucinations took full form. Customers, long gone, appeared at the pumps, translucent and flickering like old television screens. They spoke in distorted tones, pleading with Mark to release them from some unspoken bondage. The ground pulsed with a sickly heartbeat, and the station itself seemed to groan under the weight of unseen forces. Desperate to escape the madness, Mark locked himself in the office. But even there, the fumes found their way in, seeping through the cracks, forming patterns that threatened to solidify into nightmares. It became clear that the chemical spill was altering his reality, manifesting his deepest fears. As the night dragged on, Mark's mind teetered on the brink of sanity. He could no longer tell if he was awake or dreaming, alive or dead. The whispers grew louder, urging him to act, to fix what had been broken. In a moment of lucid determination, Mark decided to fight back. He donned a gas mask, armed himself with a fire extinguisher, and ventured out to confront the chaos. One by one, he approached the ghostly figures, exorcising them with bursts of CO2, dispelling the fumes that gave them life. When the dawn finally broke, the mist had cleared, and the gas station stood silent and intact. Mark, gas mask still on, surveyed the deserted pumps, the quiet now a balm to his ragged senses. But the earth where the spill had seeped in bore a new mark, an unnaturally deep fissure from which no fumes escaped, as if the ground itself had swallowed the toxic trespasser whole. In the aftermath, the company sealed the gas station, declaring it a hazard zone. Mark never returned to work, his experience too harrowing to recount in full. Yet, to those who listened, he whispered warnings of the dangers that lurk beneath, of the thin veil between reality and madness, and of the night when the gas station became a living nightmare. The last fill up. On a stretch of highway where the night was thick with fog and the air tasted of impending rain, the last travelers of the evening pulled into a quaint gas station. The station's lights were a welcome beacon against the gloom, and the travelers were eager to return to the warmth of their homes. They were met by a grinning attendant, Pete, whose eagerness to serve was matched only by the odd insistence that he be the one to pump their gas. One by one, the travelers came, a tired truck driver, a family returning from a holiday, a young couple on a road trip. Pete attended to each with the same peculiar zeal, filling their tanks to the brim. He waved off tips with a laugh that seemed too loud, too jovial against the stillness of the night. But as each car left the station, a strange affliction befell the drivers and passengers alike. The truck driver, once alert and focused, found his vision blurring, the lines on the road warping into unintelligible shapes. The family's laughter turned to silence as they became listless, their movements sluggish. The young couple grew disoriented, their love-filled conversation faltering into confusion. Pete watched them go, his grin unwavering as the gas station sign flickered in the background. By midnight, all had returned. The vehicles, now dented and coated with dust, parked haphazardly by the pumps as their occupants stumbled out, drawn back to the gas station as if by an unseen force. They moved with an awkwardness that betrayed their confusion, their eyes glazed and unfocused. The gas station, once a place of passage, became their anchor. Pete emerged from the cashier's booth, his silhouette framed by the light within. "Having trouble out there," he called out, his voice an unsettling mixture of mockery and concern. The travelers converged on him, their complaints a chorus of slurred words and incoherent sentences. They spoke of missed turns and roads that looped back, of signs unreadable and a fog that seemed to chase them. Pete listened, nodding, the station sign now eerily silent above. One by one, he invited them inside for complimentary coffee, pointing them towards the small convenience store attached to the gas station. Grateful for the respite, they shuffled in. Yet, as the door closed behind the last of them, the travelers vanished, not with a scream or a scuffle, but silently, as if they had never been. The coffee pot gurgled to itself, the warmth of the booth contrasting sharply with the cold, dense fog outside. Pete returned to his post behind the counter, the hours passing with no sign of the visitors. When the police arrived in response to a concerned call from a passerby who'd noticed the abandoned cars, Pete was calmly restocking shelves. "Lost travelers," he mused when questioned. "We get 'em all the time. They come for gas, then head off again. Easy to get turned around on nights like these." The officers searched the premises but found no trace of the missing people. As the investigation continued, more stories surfaced of the gas station's strange allure, of travelers drawn into the night, never to continue their journey. The rumor mill churned with tales of the cursed gas station and the attendant with the too bright grin. Yet, no wrongdoing could be proven, and the case grew cold, the mystery unsolved. Pete remained at the station, a fixture as permanent as the pumps and the faded sign. And to those who listened, he'd offer a word of advice with a knowing smile: be careful on the road. It's easy to get lost. But don't worry, you can always find your way back here, for one last fill-up. The pumps are watching. Nestled on a forgotten stretch of highway, a weathered gas station watched the rare passerby with a dozen sleepy eyes. Its CCTV cameras, relics from a safer time, were Jake's only company during the long overnight shifts. Jake often joked to himself that the old screens showed more dust than footage, but lately, they'd flickered to life with a new purpose. One by night, Jake noticed something peculiar. The cameras seemed to focus on things that weren't there, panning slowly to empty corners or staring too long at closed doors. He cleaned the lenses, checked the wires, but the screens kept their ghostly watch, leaving Jake with an itch of unease. Then came the night when camera 2, pointed at pump 5, began to swivel of its own accord, fixating on the road as if expecting something, or someone. The screens showed an empty lane, but out there, in the quiet dark, pump 5's handle clattered to the ground as if yanked by an impatient hand. Jake's heart stuttered. The monitors now displayed all angles of the deserted gas station, yet a creeping feeling told him he wasn't alone. He watched the screens intently, his eyes darting from one to the next, searching for the anomaly he felt certain was there. Hours crawled by, the cameras capturing the mundane symphony of an uneventful night, until the figure appeared. It was a man, broad-shouldered and standing too still across the street, his gaze locked on the station. Jake froze, the back of his neck prickling with dread. He switched to the camera with the best view of the figure, but found nothing. The road was empty. He rubbed his eyes, thinking fatigue was playing tricks on him, but when he looked again, the figure was inside, standing motionless at the edge of camera 4's frame. With every tick of the clock, the figure seemed to draw closer, yet every time Jake lifted his gaze from the monitors, the space before him was void of life. It was as if the figure existed only within the realm of those screens, a phantom caught in the loop of electronic surveillance. The station was silent, but for the hum of refrigerators and the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Jake decided to investigate, a heavy flashlight his only weapon against the night's uncertainties. He stepped cautiously around the counter, eyes darting between the real world and the one captured by the cameras. There it was again, on the screen. The figure now stood behind the counter, mere feet from where Jake was. He spun around, heart pounding, only to be met with an empty room. When he turned back to the monitors, the figure was gone. Jake searched the screen for the intruder, finding only his own frightened reflection in the glass that covered the monitors. He was about to turn away when he noticed a small detail, a red light blinking beneath camera 8. The blinking light wasn't a malfunction, it was a recording feature that had never been used. Compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, Jake played back the footage. The tape revealed the story of the last few hours in fast forward, the handle falling, his pacing, the figure appearing and reappearing closer and closer, until it stood right beside him, though he was alone. As the sun rose, the police found Jake sitting quietly, staring at the blank monitors. The recording told them everything and nothing. They saw the footage of a man who was never there, of Jake speaking to empty air, of a terror that left no trace but a man's broken mind. The cameras were removed the following day, replaced by new, digital models that promised clarity and truth. But Jake never returned to the gas station, and to those who asked, he spoke only of the watchers in the walls, of the things that live in the corners we don't see, and of the night when the cameras looked back. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.